So it looks like everybody's here, so we'll get started. Morning, everyone. I'm Christine Catallo. I'm the Chief Librarian at Pequot Library. Thank you so much for joining us virtually for today's Meet the Author program with Kaveri Madhavan, who will be talking to us today about her new book, The Tainted, which is about Irish Indians. We're excited that so many of you could join us for our program, which is free in part thanks to donations from patrons like you. Kaveri will be interviewed by Dr. Rochelle Almeida. Rochelle is a professor of the Humanities and Global Cultures, South Asian Civilization and Liberal Studies at New York University. She's also a scholar on Anglo-Indians, and she's the author of 3 monographs and a fictional memoir, The Year the World Was Mine. So as a scholar of Anglo-Indians and a close friend of Kaveri's, I know we're in for an engaging conversation with Rochelle. So now I will turn things over to Rochelle.
Thank you so much, Christine, and hello, everybody. Thanks a million for joining us on this first ever transatlantic Meet the Author event. I'm delighted that Christine and Caroline Crawford, who also works with the Meet the Author team at the library, was able to pull this off. My very special thanks, of course, to Kaveri herself, who has agreed to do this terrific Zoom meeting. I know that there are participants on this Zoom meeting from every part of the world. I see that there are people from Ireland, from England, from India, and of course from all over the United States. So we at the Pequot Library are delighted to have you join us. Thank you very much for being here. So it is my very great pleasure to welcome novelist Kaveri Madhavan, who was born in India and who emigrated to Ireland 33 years ago. She lives about 30 minutes outside of the city of Dublin and has, I believe, in 30 odd years, completely become accustomed to the Irish weather, which is a very good thing. She's the author of 3 books of fiction. She's written Paddy Indian, The Uncoupling, and the current book that we're going to be discussing, which is called The Tainted. She's also a freelance journalist and has written extensively for the Irish press and for periodicals in England. And she's currently working on her 4th novel. We are so delighted to have her join us from Dublin. So welcome Kaveri, and hearty congratulations on your lovely novel, The Tainted, which I'm going to hold up to for our viewers. This is the novel, this is what it looks like. And in a bit, I'm going to ask Kaveri to talk about the lovely cover, which I think is most eye-catching and comes from a very interesting source. But first of all, let me turn it over to Kaveri. Could you, Kaveri, for the benefit of those people who haven't read the book, because it's not yet available in the United States, tell us a little bit about the plot of The Tainted?
Okay, Rochelle, thank you so much for this invitation, and thank you, Pequot Library, for inviting me to take part in this really interesting transatlantic author meet. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. So I'll get straight into your question, Rochelle. I think you wanted to know, just give an outline of the plot. So my book is called The Tainted. It's loosely based on the mutiny of the Connacht Rangers regiment, a regiment that had a very illustrious history, from when it was first started in the 1700s, late 1700s. And it was a regiment that served all over the British Empire, on every continent, wherever the empire was. And in 1920, in the middle of the Irish freedom struggle, at the height of the Irish freedom struggle, actually, the regiment was stationed in India, in Jalandhar. And because of what was happening in Ireland with the British, and the shenanigans of a group of militia called the Black and Tans. Well, shenanigans is a mild word, but because of the extreme cruel acts committed by the Black and Tans, the Irish soldiers in India mutinied, and so my book is loosely based on that, on the what happened at the time of the mutiny. But because, and I'll explain it a little more as the interview progresses, it actually also includes the aftermath of the mutiny, what happened afterwards, and to the people left behind.
Okay.
So the book is set in the 1920s, and then the second half is set in the 1980s, both in India and in Ireland.
Right. Lovely. So you've been living in Ireland for 30 years now, and your book, like you said, is based on a true historical event, the rebellion of the Connaught Rangers. I was wondering, were you looking for some sort of event that would bring India, the land of your birth, and Ireland, the land of your immigration, together in order to create a work of fiction? I'm so very interested in knowing how you came upon the idea of using this historical event to create a work of fiction.
Well, it's just pure luck, Rochelle. I had actually just finished writing my second book, The Uncoupling, and it hadn't actually even been published. I mean, it was just in the process of being printed, and I just finished the edit of it actually. And I happened to be at an event in the Indian Embassy in Dublin, and I literally overheard a conversation about how the Indian flag was inspired by the Irish flag. Now, I don't know how true that is, but part of the conversation, somebody was, the two people who were talking were discussing this mutiny of the Connaught Rangers in India, and how the Union Jack was pulled down and the Irish flag had been pulled up, on the parade ground. And apparently that kind of was one of the inspirations for the Indian flag. Now I think that's just a bit of a myth, but it intrigued me. Just that story intrigued me, and the very next day, it was the early days of internet and Googling. But I did come home straight away, looked it up, and it was something I never even knew. I'd never heard of it before, and it was immediately drawn to the story, and I knew straight away, within a day or two of looking at it, I knew that was going to be my next book. So I stumbled upon the story by accident.
Wow, that's terrific. It's hard to believe, that you would find something like this by happenstance and then be able to
absolutely,
craft it into a fully fleshed work of fiction. So beautifully done. The other aspect of your book is Irish Indians. They are the chief protagonists of your novel.
Yes.
And for the benefit of those people who don't know what I mean when I say Irish Indians, they are the progeny, the human legacy of the British Raj in India. They were the children of the Raj. So you had the British in India representing the English as well as representing the Irish. And they cohabited with Indian women on the Indian subcontinent, and of course a whole mixed race of people that we refer to as the Eurasians, sometimes as Anglo-Indians, and in the case of Kaveri's novel, Irish Indians were created. So I am very interested in how you came to use this small little racial ethnic minority in your novel, because as you probably know, I am a scholar of Anglo-Indians, and particularly the Anglo-Indian diaspora, Anglo-Indians in Britain. So I'm really interested in how you decided to bring the Irish Indians from a small place in South India into your novel.
Again, that also was by pure accident, Rochelle, because when I started writing the book, I must have been at least when I started researching it, I realized that that there was a story in the aftermath as well. But when I began to write the book, I don't know, it just happened organically. I think when I started writing it, the fact that this young soldier, this young Irish soldier, fell in love with an Indian girl. I mean, in the 1920s, the chances of him meeting an Indian girl and falling in love with her, the realms of possibility only brought it to narrowed it down to a community that would have had contact with regiments and with the soldiers, and it just happened to be Anglo-Indians, because they would have been more cosmopolitan, they would have been more forward thinking, the chances of meeting them would be greater. And then, of course, once I started researching just that little, she only started off, Rose started off as a minor character, but literally then took over the entire book. And then, I mean, once she got into my head, then there was no stopping her. She literally took over the whole book, and anybody who's read it would know that she and her descendants, sort of populate the whole book. And then, of course, the more I researched it, the realization that in the 300 or so years that the British Empire existed in India, there have always been Irish people that have helped run that empire. Mm-hmm. And, wherever Irish men went, well, not just Irish men, but, when men left, their homes and went away for years on end, they ended up having children. And some of these liaisons were formalized, and some of them weren't. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of children were abandoned, not acknowledged by their father's people. Now, they could have been Irish, they could have been Scot, Welsh, or English, but I mean, in India, they were all clubbed together as Angrezi, or as we would say in India, Angrezi, but that would be translated as English. And it was such I find it amazing that in India and in Ireland, there's very few people know, I think, outside academia, outside his history, very few people know, the fact that so many Irishmen, left behind progeny.
Sure. Great. Absolutely. There's two things that really struck me about your response. One is that it's amazing, isn't it, for us writers, when we start on a work, that we really have no idea in what direction it will go. We start off with an idea in the mind, and afterwards, the book and the manuscript sort of takes on a life of its own, and then the characters propel us in a certain direction. And that seems to have been what happened with you.
Absolutely.
And Rose. I find that fascinating. The other very interesting thing is, like you said, other than the Eurasians, or what you called Angrezi, and that at different times were called different names, they were often called Firangi, which means apart from them, and apart from scholars like myself who work on Anglo-Indian studies, there's not a lot that people know, and they're an extremely misunderstood minority even in India.
So true.
So I just wondered, since you've talked about discovering this Connaught Rangers rebellion by chance, and then finding out about the Irish Indians by chance, what sort of research did you do, and what sort of sources did you use, to bring an authenticity to your work?
Well, I mean, the Anglo-Indians from the very start were highly educated. Like even from 200-300 years ago, Anglo-Indian children would have been well educated. They would have been able to read and write. And I say that in contrast to a lot of other groups in India. So they because of that, they actually wrote a lot. They kept a lot of diaries. And so I spent a huge amount of money buying antiquarian books, and searching and looking for them. And it was a thoroughly enjoyable research experience. But I think also because from the 30s onwards, Anglo-Indians left India, migrated to Canada, to Australia, and also to England. And I think the Anglo-Indian diaspora, they kept in touch via journals, via newsletters. So all of that was a huge source material for me. I also found a lot of very interesting social history in books and letters written by women. There were a lot of women very bored in India. A lot of Angrezi women who were totally bored, living in very sort of upcountry, small, Hicksville kind of places, up in tea plantations or jute farms or wherever. And a lot of these women were very articulate, and they wrote about their experiences as women. And that was, I found that a huge source. There were several viceroys wives and sisters who, who had spent a lot of time in India. And, so you got, I got detail about life at the very top, and then detail, or at the very bottom, well, not at the very bottom, but a lot of, there were a lot of, unusually, a lot of nurses, who went out to India from the 20s onwards, wrote lots of letters, and they have been published in volumes. So yes, that was the basis of my research for Anglo-Indians. And then for the rest of the book, in the military, of course, the military, the whole military establishment is so sort of meticulous about archiving every single detail of every single thing, so there was no problems in sourcing material from the military point of view.
Lovely. I completely agree with you about those diaries. I remember when I was living in London and I was doing research for my book on Britain's Anglo-Indians, I'd be sitting in the British Library and I'd come upon a diary like this. And I would get so fascinated by it that I'd be spending hours reading, and I had to pull myself back and say, okay, you now need to get back to more scholarly work, because this sort of diary is going to completely take you off track and off your timetable. So these diaries are fascinating, and I'm so glad. And not only were they written by these women who came out from Britain to India, and as you said, were bored stiff, but they were also written by Anglo-Indian women. The ones who said they were educated and they did spend a lot of time writing, and a lot of the Anglo-Indian women became nurses, and a lot of them wrote about the. When I say Anglo-Indian here, I mean women of mixed racial descent. They became nurses, and they wrote a lot about their experiences, particularly during the wars, because they worked as nurses on the front. So I find all of that very interesting. But coming to women, since you've talked about the women, there are a lot of references in your book to what one might call stereotypical ideas or stereotypical notions or impressions of Anglo-Indian women. For example, their desire to hide away from the sun, to not get a tan because they didn't want to get darker, their tendency to be flirtatious with the British soldiers. They did that with the Tommies even up to World War II, with the idea of hoping to ensnare one of them so that they got married, because it was said that the biggest achievement for an Anglo-Indian woman was the ability to marry a white British man or a white British Tommy. And as a result, as you rightly pointed out, so many of them ended up being left behind in England, in India, or in fact, their children were abandoned. There's also the idea of your characters as being lovers of Western music and Western dance. They are proficient at playing the piano. They teach music, which is what I know of teachers in India. In fact, my piano teacher in Bombay was an Anglo-Indian, and I ended up writing a short story about my Anglo-Indian piano teacher. So I'm just wondering, there are some of the representations of the Anglo-Indian women that are completely true to life, but that some may read as derogatory impressions, as being stereotypical. How would you react to that? And I'm curious to know, how have Anglo-Indian or Irish Indian women reacted to your book? Have you had anybody get back to you about how the women have been represented in the book?
Yeah, I mean, that was always at the back of my mind, not right through while I was writing it, but after it was written, in the editing process. And, I was extremely aware of not being Anglo-Indian and writing about them. But what I would say to you is, Rochelle, is that, the way I portrayed them, for example, Father Jerome, the priest, what he thinks of Anglo-Indians is what people thought of Anglo-Indians at that time.
Yeah.
That's how people thought of them. So I'm hoping that my readers will see how unfair that was.
Yeah, absolutely.
For me, a really huge boost and a bonus after I wrote the book was in February. I was in India at a conference in Madras, and happened to be sitting next to a lady who I didn't know at all. And she asked me, what are you here for? And I said, oh, here's my book, and I'm going to be talking about it. And she looked at me and she said, what's the book about? And I said, oh, it's about, it deals with the Anglo-Indian history. And I gave her a rough outline. And she looked at me and she said, well, I'm an Anglo-Indian and I take huge objection. I really object to you calling the book The Tainted. And I was so taken aback, but this is exactly what I had been prepared for. So I gave her the copy of the book that I had, and I said, look, would you please read it and then tell me what you think? And it turned out she was actually a recently retired professor of English in a very, very prestigious college in Madras. And her name is Eugenie Pinto, and I hope she gets to see this interview sometime. But she rang me about a week later and she said, I'd like to meet with you. And I was really very nervous going to meet her. But when I did meet her, she approached me with her hands out. She took my hands in her hands and she said, I want to thank you for writing this book, for portraying us as we are and as we were, and making no judgments. And I was, we had lunch then immediately after, and she had actually made notations on practically every third or fourth page. And, she went through with me appreciating. She said, you got this right, you got that right. And, she queried a few things as well, of course. But on the whole, she was totally in love with the book. And for me, there was no better endorsement than one coming from, an Anglo-Indian. She's probably, maybe in her early 60s. And so she's seen life. She's taught English. She's read books. And I'm telling you, that was for me the biggest endorsement. So I'm hoping that people see how biased I hope people see how biased perceptions were and are even to this day against Anglo-Indians.
Yeah.
I hope people get that in the book.
Yeah, and also I hope people see that the Anglo-Indian woman has herself evolved from rose in the 1920s to the 1980s, when you have the contemporary Anglo-Indian woman who's so with it and highly educated and doesn't have any of the pretensions or whatever that have been stereotyped for so long. So and yes, I too found your representation of your characters was highly sympathetic, and was one of the reasons why, like you, I hope other Anglo-Indians read this novel and will get an understanding of your intentions. That brings me to your setting, Kaveri. It's set in a fictional place that you call Nandagiri. Yeah. And I'm aware from reading it that it was in South India in the Nilgiri Hills. And I understand that it would have been, it was in Kunur. I'm wondering if you, as part of your research, whether, first of all, do you know Kunur personally? And do you know any Anglo-Indian or Irish Indians still in Kunur? And do you have any idea of whether they have any contact with their Irish paternal side in Ireland? It would just be interesting to know what the current connections or the current relationships are.
Yeah, no, you see, the book, the actual mutiny of the Connaught Rangers took place in Jalandhar in Punjab. And I had written 3 chapters of the book before I realized, and when I wrote the first 3 chapters, I had actually I called the regiment the Connaught Rangers, and it was as close to the Connaught Rangers as possible. But when I was 3 chapters in, I realized that I would have to actually fictionalize the regiment, because every regiment has only one chaplain, there's only one colonel, one adjutant. So I was putting words into mouths of people who were real and who had descendants. So I didn't want to get into a situation where I was, where I'd be pilloried for that. So what I did was I fictionalized the regiment. I called them the Kildare Rangers. And of course, once I did that, it just set me free to be able to, place the mutiny anywhere in India. And I picked South India because I am from Chennai, from the South. And, I'm not very familiar with the Nilgiri range when I started. But I tell you something, I made myself very familiar with it by the time I finished writing the book, because I traveled there and I trekked for weeks on end with a guide into the deep jungle, and got to know and got to know the flora, the fauna of the place. And because I knew at that stage that one of my characters was going to be, you know, one of the main characters, Jerry, was going to be a forestry officer. So I needed to know enough, you know, have enough background knowledge. So, you know, I did make myself very familiar. And Kunur, even today, this little town called Kunur is still a garrison town in South India. You know, my father's regiment, the Madras Sappers, my father was in the army. And so the Madras Sappers have, you know, have a base there. And so I'm based, this fictional town of Nandagiri is actually, you know, based around Kunur. And unfortunately, I never came across, would you believe it, I never actually came across any Irish Indians. But all my life, throughout my schooling, I had many Anglo-Indian friends. Many, some of my best friends were Anglo-Indians. And I think I've always had this obsession with that community, and I have no idea why. You know, I had teachers and friends, but this, for the book itself, I never actually came across any Irish Indians. But having said that, now I don't know. Maybe many of my friends in school might have had, you know, Irish connections. I have no idea.
Well, yes, thank you. And that's again another reason why I went into Anglo-Indian studies. It was because I had memories growing up in India of wonderful Anglo-Indian classmates.
Yes.
And I also had wonderful Anglo-Indian teachers. And I guess those were the forces that then led me towards studying the community, you know, because they became more and more scarce in India as they emigrated, and there was this mass exodus out of India. So, absolutely, and I was thinking, you know, there could be worse places than Kunur to get to know well.
Which is one of the reasons why my research took so long, because I just enjoyed it so much.
I bet.
You know, so it's fun. Yeah.
I bet you didn't want to leave once you went there to do research, and you know.
True. Absolutely, you're dead right.
So that's terrific. I'm glad. I was wondering, you know, when you choose to create a plot that spans such a large period of time that sort of begins in 1920 and then brings us all the way into the 1980s. It takes a certain kind of skill to be able to bring that vast passage of time together, and you've done it terrifically. So I wondered, you know, what is your training? Did you study creative writing? Where did you develop these admirable skills that enabled you to write so ambitious a novel?
Oh, you're so kind. No, I have no formal training. You know, my own university degree is in economics. So, you know, I have no English literature formal studying at all. But I've always liked to write. I used to write for my school paper and for my college. But I think my love of writing came from my love of reading, which you know, is definitely, I can only thank my mom and dad for it. You know, they were huge readers. My parents were huge readers. My father passed away after my second book, but you know, my mother's still a massive reader. You know, in fact, she was the first person to read the book, to read my manuscript. It was my mother, you know, who read my manuscript. And you know, just in terms of the you know, the scope of the book, and as you say, in the ambitious nature of it, I actually don't even know how it happened because I had no, I mean, I hadn't plotted the book out. You know, I only just wanted to write about the mutiny, you know, very arty-farty, but that's, you know, that just happens to be the way I write. And I recently read a description of that kind of writing, which I know lots of writers write like that, not just myself, lots and lots of writers write like that. And it's called writing by headlights, apparently. So it's like, you know, you're driving in the dark, and you know, you can only see, you know, 15 or 20 feet ahead. But as you keep going, you know, the headlights just illuminate your way as you go. And that's what happened, you know, that's what happened with me. And in fact, that's how my two previous books were written as well. You know, I had no plan or plot for it in advance. Now, I did know how the book was going to end. By the time I was maybe 3/4 of the way through the book, I knew how the book was going to end, you know. But Rochelle, when I wrote the book, you know, you've read the book, you know, it is set in two halves, you know, 1920
Yeah.
and 1980. But when I wrote the book, it was actually every alternate chapter went back and forth. And my mother, when she read the book for the first time, you know, she said to me, she said, oh, you know, I had to, every chapter I had to go back and see what was happening in the chapter before the last one. But I mean, I didn't sort of make any changes. But when the book went into my editor, who absolutely, I mean, literally, she's my god, my guru. Her name is Joan Deach, and I owe so much to Joan, because you know, she has edited all my books. But with this book, she came back to me and she said, I literally want to change nothing, except I want you to club all the chapters in the 1920s together and all the chapters in the 1980s together. And that actually transformed the book, because it just made it easier for the reader. You know, otherwise, in fact, she said it to me. She said, you know, you're expecting your reader to be so committed that they will stick with you, you know, going back and forth, back and forth. Why don't you just make the job easier for them by just clubbing the chapters in the 1920s together and the 1980s together and divided the book into two? And literally, it was just the best thing that ever happened to that book. You know, was just that simple act of, you know, cutting and pasting the chapters together. So yes, I owe her a lot.
I think that was an excellent idea, because like you said, I think it would have been much too confusing for your reader to have to switch back and forth from one chapter to the other. In many ways, what you've just described, and in many ways, the book itself reminds me, and I'm sure you're familiar with this because you must have taken perhaps even inspiration. I thought about Heat and Dust, which is really what Jabala, you know, Jabala keeps doing exactly that. She moves from the 1920s, early 20th century, and brings it down to the 1970s. And at no point in time is the reader confused, because it is such a skillful arranging of chapters that allows you to sort of keep abreast with what's going on in different epochs. So once again, I thought that was quite beautifully done. So you have talked about it already. People are always keen to know about a writer's creative process. And I wondered whether you have any particular sort of outline that you work on. What is your creative process like? How does your book, or how do your books move from conception to publication? Do they go through, do you keep revising as you do each chapter, or do you write a whole first draft and then go back to rewrite? I'm just interested in your creative process, as in fact a lot of people are.
Yeah, well, I'm a very slow writer, Rochelle. So if for me 500 words, you know, 2 pages a day is I would be so happy, you know. So I write very early in the morning. I wake up at 4:30, so I write between 5 and 9. I'm a sort of addicted to golf. So, you know, if I write, then I play golf as a treat, you know. So, and also then if I've written, then I know that my game of golf will be sort of hassle-free, because I'm not stressed about, oh, I didn't write today, you know. But, and the reason I'm mentioning golf is because I find, you know, golf and gardening, my 2 hobbies, very, very much contribute to my ability to write, because that gardening and golf gives me my thinking time. And literally, you know, I think about my book. I've only just realized it, that I'm thinking about my book all the time. You know, I'm all the time thinking about, oh, I could use that, or what will I do? You know, even when I'm gardening, I'm thinking, you know, sometimes thinking even aloud. So, in terms of my process, you know, like for example, now I've just started my next book, and it's going to span from about 1930 right up to 2000. You know, so I've already started now. You know, because I wrote The Tainted, I'm very familiar with right up to 1940. But there's a period of Indian history that I have absolutely no knowledge about. I have no knowledge about India in the 50s. It's kind of like a lost decade, you know. And I'm now trying to look up books and movies. And that was the fun part of writing The Tainted. You know, my research involved looking at, you know, I read extensively in that period. I only watched movies. I absolutely consumed movies that were set in the 20s to the 40s, you know, whether it was India or Ireland, or, you know, even anywhere in the empire. So I don't, as I said, I don't plot out the book. I never have. I write slowly. I sort of I write in the morning. I would tend to look at my work again at night. Might make a few editing changes and stuff. What else can I say about my writing process? I know, and I know this sounds again very kind of vague, but I do trust the characters to just tell me their story as it's going. It's a very peculiar thing, but it works. I don't know. Does that even answer? Such a vague. I know I've given you sort of a vague answer, but the process is very vague.
The thing is that this question has no right answer. Everybody.
Yeah, so you're right. Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Rochelle. You saved me there. I was trying to think, what else can I say?
Oh, this is fine. I'm interested. I'm going to ask you one last question before I open it up to our participants, because I'm sure they have a lot to ask you also. I'm going to ask you one question, and that's about the attitude of the Irish with regards to immigrants in their country today, because that's what you are. We all know that the Irish experienced a great deal of prejudice over the years at the hands of the English, and they do know what it is to have been discriminated against. I'm wondering, you've just had a prime minister. I know you've just had a change, but you've had Leo Varadkar as your prime minister for a while, and he had an Indian Maharashtrian father. I'm wondering, what was the attitude of the Irish towards people of color living among them, in their midst? And if you want to call it people of color, people call it minorities. There's a BAME, there's all sorts of names for it. But what is the attitude of the Irish towards immigrants now from other parts of the world, such as yourself, living in their midst and assuming positions now of authority and of political power?
Yeah, just briefly about Leo Varadkar, our ex-prime minister. I was so proud. When he was elected, of that whole election campaign. Not because I was supporting him or anything. That's nothing to do with my political affiliations, but I was very proud of the fact that in Ireland, the fact that he was half Indian, that he was, the son of an immigrant, and the fact that he was gay never came into the discussion. It was the day he was elected, the world's media descended onto the story, and said, "Oh my God, Ireland elected somebody who's openly gay and who is, half Indian, of mixed race." Mm-hmm. And it was an amazing thing that, during the campaign, that those two things never figured. And that made me so proud of Ireland that, people just discounted that. It just literally did not even come into the political debate, those two things about him. But coming back to, how Ireland treats or has treated its migrant population. I mean, obviously there has been the rise of the far right in Ireland as well. Nothing like it has anywhere else in the world. But don't forget, Rochelle, Ireland, not only were they colonized, but they are also a nation of migrants. They have migrated all over the world, and that's not historical. That happens, to this day. Sure. So, most Irish families know what it's like to have left home, to have somebody, away, for people to be desperate to come back, or people who don't want to come back, So, let me put it this way, if we felt unwelcome, we wouldn't have stayed.
Yeah. And you do seem to have a very nice writers group in Ireland too, from what I can see.
Yeah.
You have a very supportive group of writers that are, I think, from all over, including several Indian writers that are part of that group. I think you all are a really good support system to one another, from everything I can see.
Yes, in fact, when I first started writing Paddy Indian, before, this is pre-internet and pre-mobile phones and WhatsApp groups, we actually had an Irish writer, very well-known Irish writer who's a children's writer, and so she facilitates a lot of talk and discussion and stuff about children's writing and children's publishing. Her name is Sarah Webb. And she actually got together a group of Irish writers, and we would meet once in 2 months and have dinner and a bit of chat, and that support group kind of it broke up after a while, just because people just got busy and stuff, but I mean, that loose network of writers supporting each other is very much there. It's a small country, mind you, so it's very easy for people to get to know each other, just 4.5 million people, so it's really, it's not an island, it's a rock.
Sure. Sure. Well, thank you so much, Kaveri. I'm going to now turn it over to our participants. If there is anybody that would like to ask Kaveri questions, perhaps Christine could field them. So Christine, if you would take over and perhaps put the questions across, Kaveri can respond to some of our participants. Once again, it's such an honor to be able to do this, Kaveri. It's been a fascinating conversation. I loved the novel, and I certainly wish it very well on its journey into the world. I know it's going to be published in the United States in August, and then in India in September. It's got terrific press. People are talking so very highly of it, and I really do want you to enjoy your moment. This is
oh, thank you.
And you deserve to enjoy it, and to go out and speak about it, because it brings so many different aspects about Irish Indian living together. Let's now throw it open to our audience if anybody has any questions.
So feel free to enter any questions into the chat, or you can raise your hand, or just jump in if you feel like it.
Okay. Well, I just saw a question from Lauren. Is it Lauren? Yeah, I just saw a question from Lauren about how I arrived at the title of the book. And maybe I could just explain. So the Tainted is, why the Tainted exactly? Yeah, Celia's asking the same. So I picked the title The Tainted because it actually deals with 3 groups of people who were tainted by association. So the Anglo-Indians, who were tainted by, their mixed race. The Irish Catholic soldiers who mutinied, they were tainted by the fact that they were Irish and they were serving the crown. So in Ireland, they were nearly considered traitors. So they were tainted by that. And then the third group of people in the book are the Anglo-Irish people, the Anglo-Irish community, who were never English enough to be English and never Irish enough to be Irish. And that sentiment, has actually continued like nearly up to the last 5 or 6 years. So, so the Tainted really is about 3 groups of people who are tainted by association.
And Kaveri, can you talk a little bit about the cover as well? Your choice.
Yes, I'd love to tell you about the cover. So the cover was designed by a man called James Nunn. He's a well-known book designer, and I absolutely love the cover. He took his inspiration from matchbox labels, vintage matchbox labels from the 1920s. And the original matchbox label that he based the design on is kind of very similar, and I just love the typeface. Everything is from that from that matchbox label vintage.
Excellent, thank you. Shall we go for another question?
Yes, we have another question in the chat. So it says, you mentioned, Kaveri, that you've had a long-standing love of writing despite not having formal training. Was there a teacher or professor who encouraged or influenced your writing?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I had 2 teachers who were very influential. One was Mrs. Desai. Her name was Mrs. Desai, and she was my English teacher when I was doing my finishing school. And I also had a geography teacher who was, a big herself, Mrs. Mehta, and she was a huge influence, on me. Yes, God, I owe so much to my teachers. Oh my God, I get very emotional when I think of all the teachers I've had over the years, and yes, they would have been hugely influential.
Thanks. I think there's another question about, is the book available? This is from Angie. Is the book available? I believe available on Amazon. Is it?
Yeah, it's available on Amazon. Yes. But it'll be freely available in the States from August onwards.
Right. You have an American edition coming out.
Yeah.
Yes, and I'm sure it's also going to be very well received and eagerly looked for in India, because I
Yeah.
already know I know Anglo-Indian scholars are already talking about it, and they can't wait to include it. I myself am going to include it in a scholarly article I'm working
Oh,
on
fantastic. Yeah.
on
Yeah.
Anglo-Indian women. So I know that it will be very well received when it does come out.
Thank you, Rochelle. Yeah. So I think somebody had asked. I think I just saw a question pop up about my next book, and my next book is about a 90-year-old man based in India, who is looking back on his life, and it has a few characters, historical Irish characters, but they're not the main players in the book. Well, not as yet, anyway, and, unless one of them decides to make their way into the book in a bigger way. But yes, it has a few Irish characters, but it's set in India.
There's one more question, Christine. It's from Celia Rodericks, and she says, most students are apprehensive about creative writing. How would you help them out? How would you instill in them, I guess, confidence to try their hands at creative writing?
Yeah, you see, I mean, what I would say is that it's almost like any other job. You just have to sit at the desk and actually write. And once you start writing, maybe if you cross that, the first words, the first line, the first 10 lines, your writing will then flow. So many people write in their heads, but it's never writing till it's actually written down properly. So I mean, my sort of encouragement would be just sit down and write it, and don't wait to have that special room, that special desk. You don't need any of that. You can just write anywhere, but there's no, what I want to say is there's no point in writing in your head. You just need to sit down and do it.
Yeah, I would add to that, since I'm a professor of writing and I have students who ask me all the time, what would you say? What is your advice? And I say that I can sum up my advice to you. If you want to be a writer, I can sum it up in 6 words. And the 6 words are read, 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 write, write, write.
Oh, Rochelle, you're spot on. Spot on. You said it.
Absolutely the best advice I can give anyone who wants to be a writer in any medium, whether you're writing a novel, you're writing poetry, or writing for the screen. Read, read, read. Write, write, write.
Yeah, I think I'll use that as my own mantra.
Right. Well, anybody else with any other questions? We still have about 5 to 6 minutes more. Does anybody else want to ask Kaveri about either her life as a writer or her novel?
We have a question.
Yeah, I saw the question from Doris about whether living in Ireland had a huge influence on how my story unfolded. And yes, it absolutely did, because in Ireland was literally a mirror of the Anglo-Indian community in India, except that they were most Anglo-Irish people would be better off than Anglo-Indians. So yes, and that's the reason they crept. That's the reason they feature in the book, because after living in Ireland, I observed their own peculiar circumstances. I hope that answers your question, Doris.
There's one more from Leslie Matani. Are there any books that you've reread? If so, which ones and why?
I have, actually, and I'm a huge fan of Barbara Kingsolver's books. And a book that I've gone back to 3 times has been the Poisonwood Bible. Mm-hmm. I absolutely loved the book. Another book that I've read more than once is Jeffrey Eugenides' book Middlesex. Mm-hmm. And I think it is a combination of history, authentic, real history, blended into a family story that that I loved with both the writers.
So I think we have one last question from Celia. Do you plan to write more about Irish culture, people? And
yes, I think my 5th book is going to be set in Ireland. I have kind of a vague idea of what it's going to be. And it's going to be set in West Cork, part of Ireland that I absolutely love, in rural West Cork. And I can't wait to finish writing my 4th book so that I can get to my 5th book. Yeah, Sarah, I hope, do you have any connections? I'd love for the book to be made into a film.
Is Sarah a filmmaker? Okay, I think we've, Christine, I think we've run out of questions perhaps, and I don't know if there's anybody else who would like to ask anything, but if you haven't read the book, or if you are in a position to pick it up on Amazon, please do so. If not, of course, there are good chances that you would be able to get it in your country pretty soon, and I hope that you will make every attempt to read it, because I believe you're definitely going to be in for a treat. Thank you so very much, all of you, for being here. It's been such a pleasure to do this whole Zoom meetup, and perhaps this is the way going forward, connecting us from wherever in the world we may be,
Yeah.
And introducing us to authors, and to listen to them speak about their work and to talk about their writing is such a treat. And we don't need to be in their same, in their geographical location anymore to be able to do that. So many
Thank you, Rochelle.
Many thanks, Kaveri. Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Caroline Crawford of the Pequot Library. Thank you to Stephanie Coakley of the Pequot Library. And I'm hoping that this is the first of many more transatlantic, transcontinental, and indeed global ventures to come. So many, many thanks, all of you, for attending. It's been such a pleasure to have you.
Thanks, Rochelle, and everybody stay safe.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks,
Thank you.
Kaveri. Thanks, Rochelle.
Thanks so much.